Hello and welcome to English Literature with Susan. Today I'm going to talk about different genres in Victorian era. Mostly the genres are divided into novel or fiction, poetry, and drama. So I'm going to talk about each of these genres and the treatment of them in the Victorian period one by one. Of course, the dominant form is the novel. This is a great time for the novel writing. People, the middle classes, were recently joined the reading community. So they needed something that they could digest as readers, and novel was much more easier to digest, to read and analyze by ordinary readers, not the elite readers of literature. So it's kind of as devoid of the complexities and sophistry of poetry, and the meaning was just behind the words for them. So novel became a dominant genre both among the middle classes and especially among women. And many novels are written at the period which focus on women or target women as their protagonists, or they are written by female writers and they are taken seriously. And this is something totally new in the history of England. Previously, women could not just write and claim that they are the writers, according to Susan Gobar and Sandra Gilbert. They kind of suffered from the anxiety of authorship. They were not accepted in the society. The Bronte sisters are a case in point. The Jane and Emily and Charlotte, Emily and Anne, all of them were engaged in such social issues, and they used, for example, pseudonyms which were gender neutral, so they couldn't just write with their names at first. But as the Victorian era passed through time, it was made possible. As the Victorian novels are very large, very they have too many pages, and they are mostly focusing on the middle upper classes. As their size suggests, though, Victorian novels seek to represent a large and comprehensive social world. They are not expressive, therefore, they are reflexive. They are reflecting the society. This is the high time of realist novel. So, in a realist novel, we see characters, for example, that we can see in the streets, or we can recognize the characters, or and we can just identify with the settings. Everything is just a mirror of the everyday life of the people. So with the variety of classes in the Victorian time and social settings that constitutes a community. So the Victorian community is well represented in the Victorian novel. And let me tell you, one attempt made in many of these novels on the side of the protagonist is to just go up the social ladder. So wherever they are, they try to be in the higher step. They contain a multitude of characters, and sometimes it is very difficult to just follow those characters. There is not just one main character. There are some characters with some complicated relationships and a number of plots. So we have always one plot and some other subplots setting in motion the kinds of patterns that reveal the author's vision of the deep structures of the social world. So again, we see society is important. The social milieu is represented in these novels. How, in George Eliot's words, the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experiments of time. So we see the mixture of the Victorian society and the passage of time in these novels, and of course the realistic treatment of these subject matters. They present themselves as realistic, that is, as representing a social world that shares the features of the one we inhabit. So we can just easily recognize, I mean the Victorian society, the members of that society, could easily recognize and identify with the issues or with the settings of those novels. The experience that the Victorian novelists most frequently depict is a set of social relationships where you are in the society, your place in the society, how that place is related to other people, in the middle class society developing around them. So, middle classes or the bourgeois class are the main characters, or set the main, let's say, target focus of these novels. And there is one big reason behind it. The middle classes were also the people who prefer to read novels, who bought novels. So the main audience in the market were the middle classes. So when the market and actually what is presented in the market are matching, the middle classes are also the subject matter. It's a society where the material condition, the money condition of life indicates social position. So your social position is related to your social class, and you're treated based on that. Where money defines opportunity. So the more you have money, you have better opportunities in life, whether it is the case of marriage, whether it is the case of a profession. So as much as money you have, you have a better position in the society. Our social class enforces a powerful sense of stratification. So everyone knows about the limitations of their own class, of the ways through which they can go up the ladder, that social ladder, that stratification. So everything, every step is just represented, and you belong to your own society, and you have to some rights. You have to initiate before having the right, having the permission to enter the new community. And yet, of course, the society is very layered. It is hierarchical. But in the novels, we see that the chance for class mobility exists. So some characters can change social class. One example is Jane Eyre in Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, with the same title. We see that Jane, from a low class person, from an orphan, turns out to be the wife of a gentleman. Or we can see this somehow ironically in Wuthering Heights, um, where Heathcliff actually makes a marriage, upper than his own social class. Or Kathy herself and her marriage with Edgar is one example, or Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. So in these novels, we see that the characters had the chance, or famously David Copperfield as an orphan again becomes a famous author. And of course, that novel is an autobiographical novel. And we see Great Expectations, Pip, and that novel. So we see many characters who had the chance, and they could just change their social position in that stratified society. And many paintings just address this topic of the upper caste. So everyone wishes to be here, to be part of this community. But I insist that you see the other side of the coin of the Victorian culture and society as well. No, unlike those people who traveled on their own carriages and private carriages, and they had a luxurious kind of life, there were people who simply were living sometimes under dire conditions, and no kind of complacencies provided for the previous group are not available to these people. About characterization in Victorian novel, we can see that the characters are mostly full of aspiration. They always want more, and they are greedy for more, and not necessarily in the negative sense of it. And they want to do something to have the chance to go one level up. So most Victorian novels focus on a protagonist whose effort to define his or her place in society is the main concern of the plot. The novel thus, Pep in Great Expectation is one example. The novel thus constructs a tension between surrounding social conditions and the aspiration of the hero or heroine, and the hero or heroine should struggle to get to that let's say level, whether it be for a love, social position, or a life adequate to his or her imagination. So the ways are different and various, but the characters are always greedy or full of aspiration to get up in the social ladder. And the female characters or protagonists are the focus of attention of the writers, whether in the novels written by women or in the novels written by men. So this tension and the tension between the social class, the society, and the protagonist makes the novel the natural form to use in portraying women's struggle, because women, if you have two genders, female and male, the men were not in so much struggle in the Victorian society. Women were very limited. So if the author could just choose female protagonist, he or she could represent that struggle better for self-realization in the context of the constraints imposed upon her. For both men and women writers, the heroine is often, therefore, the representative protagonist whose search for fulfillment emblematizes the human condition. The great heroines of Victorian fiction are very famous: Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Maggie Tolliver, the character in Mill and the Floss by George Eliot, Dorothea Brooke in March by Eliot, Isabel Archer in Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. The novel is written by an American novelist, Henry James, but Henry James spent a great part of his life in Europe, and the setting of the novel, The Portrait of a Lady, is a continental one. Mostly it happens in England and Italy, and A Test of the D'Urberville by Thomas Hardy, Evan Becky Sharp, and A Vanity Fair by Thackeray all seem in some way to illustrate George Eliot's judgments, voiced in the prelude to Middlemarch, of a certain spiritual grandeur ill-matched with meanness of opportunity. So this is the issue of the female novelist, and I'm just going to review some of the plots of these novels. I have already addressed the plot of Jane Eyre and Vanity Fair, and you can just watch my previous video on this, on the Victorian period part two. But about Maggie Tolliver, Dorothea Brooke, and Tessa de D'Urberville, I'm going to talk in more detail. The story of The Mill and the Floss is an autobiographical one, based on the life story of Marian Evans, famous as George Eliot. George Eliot was her pseudonym. She was forced to use a male pseudonym because of her bad reputation in the society. Marian Evans was not married, and she entered into the life of a married man. Of course, that man's marriage was an open marriage already, but the society condemned Marian Evans. So she was forced to use a pseudonym, because if she published her novels with her own name, nobody would buy them because of her ill reputation as a fallen woman. So she chose the pseudonym George Eliot, and she published her novel The Mill and the Floss, which was a huge success. The novel is autobiographical because the main characters of the novel are a brother and a sister, Tom and Maggie, and Tom and Maggie represent Marian Evans and her own brother and the issues they had. After Marian Evans chose to be a fallen woman, her brother rejected her into the family, and she really loved that brother. So the novel is written to show that kind of wished for reconciliation on the side of Marian Evans. The characters of the novel, of course, Maggie is the main character. Her brother Tom is also one. Maggie has two relationships in this novel with Philip and Stephen. Philip is a hunchback kind of boy, with whom Mary starts a kind of romantic relationship or a deep type of friendship. And Stephen is betrothed to one of Maggie's cousins, and he also shows some interest towards Maggie. And because of this kind of open relationships Maggie has, her brother Tom banishes her. And in all the novel, throughout the course of the novel, Maggie tries a reconciliation with Tom. And when this happens and the brother and sister are shortly reconciled, they are actually drowned. So the relationship at the end of the day goes nowhere, and Maggie's life as well. So they say that the male is representative of the culture, and also Tom, the brother, and the Floss, the river, is a representative of Maggie herself and nature. And they say that how nature would just overrule everything if it is feminine, and the power of the feminine is like this. It can ruin the cultural aspect. So there are various readings and analysis of the novel that you can check. About Middlemarch represents the rural rustic community in England, and it besides that shows the progress of the story by the representation of the love relationships of three couples. Dorothea Brooke and Will Ladislaw are the first ones. Dorothea is as a woman's interested in sciences, and she's full of passion for learning, knowing, and reading. And this is why at first she's just interested in Reverend Casaubon. Casaubon is a pedantic man, and he's working on a book about the myth of man or something. But at first, Dorothea is very interested in this guy, and they marry. Soon she understands that he's the wrong choice. He condemns Dorothea for her uh, passionate kind of initiation for learning. And it seems so childish to Casaubon. And Reverend Casaubon is also, outdated in his scientific knowledge and his understanding of philosophy of life. So Dorothea is also disillusioned. After Mr. Casaubon dies, one cousin of Casaubon, Ladislaw, shows interest in Maggie. He's young in Dorothea. He's very young, and they seem to understand one another. They share the same chemistry. Mr. Ladislaw proposes, and Dorothea has to uh, just disinherit herself first from Mr. Casaubon so that she can experience a second marriage. You see those Victorian rules. So they start a happy marriage. Dorothea has another sister, Lucy. She's really attractive, pretty, and she knows it. And Dorothea had formerly a suitor. When she rejects that suitor, he just proposes to Lucy, and Lucy accepts. And that sister Lucy is a kind of foil for the character of Dorothea as an independent woman, a woman whose goals, whose intentions are different from many other women who are her contemporaries, many other angels in the houses, we can say. Another couple representing or just progressing the story of this novel are Mary Garth and Fred Vincy. Fred's family are forcing him to become a priest, and Mary's family kind of tell him, if you want to become a priest, you have no position in this family, you cannot propose to our daughters. So Fred is forced to go against the will of his parents, and then he can have Mary and Mary's family's favor. And the last couple in the story are Rosamund Vincy, Fred Vincy's sister, and Tertius Lydgate, a physician. Um, Actually, Rosamund marries Lydgate because she thinks that getting married to a doctor, to a physician, is totally different from any other experiences that Victorian woman can have. But she's also ruining that life by just suppressing Lydgate's wishes. And so this is a kind of let's say, a wrong relationship or a disillusioned relationship on both sides. And all of these couples kind of show this sparkling relationship of Dorothea Brooke and Will Ladislaw. So they are acting like foil relationships or reflexive relationships. They are in there so that we can understand the contrast between these two relationships and Dorothea Brooke and Will Ladislaw's one. And about Tess of the D'Urberville, written by Thomas Hardy. Tess of the D'Urberville is a novel which represents English naturalism. Naturalism in France, United States, and England is treated differently. Emile Zola, the father of naturalism, a French writer and critic, emphasizes that in his naturalism he relies on determinism. So we have hereditary deterministic factors and also social factors, environmental factors involved, determination. But he believes that we have the possibility of changing at least our social kind of determination, while the English version of nationalism represented by Thomas Hardy is fatalistic, so no possibilities of change. The novels of Thomas Hardy are all set in his imaginary place called Wessex, and in that Wessex, there are no gods in the sense that there are gods here. Of course, the people believe in God, there are churches, but Thomas Hardy's world doesn't have a god. He has the president of the immortals, or some gods in the mythological sense of the term. By the way, the story of Tess of the D'Urberville starts on a crossroad or somewhere like that, where a priest, again, he's making a great change in the life of the family. The priest tells someone who is Tess's father, Mr. Derbyfield, that you're not actually Derbyfield, you're D'Urberville. And just check Derbyfield as a common family name or something like the family name common in the countryside of England. D'Urberville is a French one, so it shows higher class or something like that. So Tessa's father searches for the D'Urbervilles around, and he finds an old lady who is blind, sharing the same name. Of course, the woman doesn't inherit the name. It is actually a bought. Sometimes you could just buy these titles and these kind of great names. So Tessa's father convinces that woman to accept Tess as a maid, and she goes there. That woman has a very hearty and sexually passionate son, Alec. Alec rapes Tess. Tess gets pregnant. She comes back home. She doesn't tell Alec that she's pregnant, and Tess is banished from the society when she comes home. Her child is born, and she calls her Sorrow. Sorrow gets sick a little while later and dies, and she's just buried on a crossroad because the baby was not that she was not the real child of a marriage. She was the offspring of a rape. And well, Tess goes to a farm to work in there, and there she got acquainted with Angel. Angel, you feel that the Savior Angel is coming to Tess. On the eve of their marriage, Tess tells Angel that she's not a virgin, that she already had a child and everything. And this truth bothers Angel. Indignantly, she leaves for Brazil. He leaves for Brazil, putting Tess alone in the dark life she had. Alec once again comes back. Now he knows that Tess had a child with him, and he promises protection of Tess and her family, and Tess accepts for her family's sake. And when Tess is okay with Alec, Angel comes back again, and that love is once again uh, kind of start to burn in the hearts of Tess and Angel. So Tess kills Alec, and they together fly. uh, the policemen find them and they execute Tess. So this is where Thomas Hardy expresses words in this meaning that the president of the immortals had done his sport with Tess, and Tess is now executed. Um, Not only women characters or female characters are central in Victorian novels, but also female writers. So, from the beginning of the 19th century, even before the Victorian era began, the novel was more than a fertile medium for the portrayal of women. Women writers were, for the first time, not figures on the margins, but major authors. Jane Austen, the Brontes, Elizabeth Gaskell, George Eliot, all have to define the genre and their position as female writers. But of course, there are other genres for the novel written in the Victorian times, whether written by women or men. The Victorian novel was extraordinarily various. It encompasses a wealth of styles and genres, from the extravagant comedy of Dickens to the gothic romances of the Bronte sisters, from the satire of Thackeray to the biographical fiction of Eliot, from the sociopolitical realism of Sherlock to the sensation novels of Wilkie Collins. You can see these figures one by one here. Later in the century, a number of popular genres developed: crime, mystery, and horror novels, as well as science fiction and detective stories. The best kind of detective novel written at the era and persistent today even is Arthur Conan Doyle's The Stories of Sherlock Holmes. And maybe he said the whole genre and many other detectives are just recreated based in the character of Sherlock Holmes. And now we can turn to Victorian poetry. Because it was a high time of novel writing, some of the poets also wrote narrative poems, long narrative poems, famous as verse novels. So they had many of the elements of the novel, but the difference was in the medium of representation. They were represented in verse. So as a novel emerged as a dominant form of literature, poets sought new ways of telling stories in verse. Examples include Tennyson's Maud, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh, Robert Browning's The Ring and the Book. Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning were husband and wife, and Arthur Hugh Cowles' Amours de Voyage. About mud, it's somehow sometimes criticized by the contemporaries of Tennyson as a sick kind of poem. There are three main characters in the novel: narrator, Maud, and Maud's brother. The narrator is in a very bad condition. He has lost his father, but he finds solace in the love of Maud. But Maud's brother is against the relationship of these two, so a duel starts between the two, and the narrator kills Maud's brother, and then he flees. So he flies away from England. So that's why they say that it's full of depression and things like that. And about Aurora Leigh. Aurora Leigh is a novel set in four different locations in Italy, England, and France, and it is about the power of women as writers. Aurora is a female writer, and the whole story is written based on like her memoirs, for example, like her diaries. And Aurora, she was born in Florence. She's later on Mr. Romney proposes to her, but Mr. Romney is skeptical about the abilities of women, the writing abilities of women. But later on, he's convinced, and they got married. So this is the story in which we see the vindication or the justification of the position of women as writers in the Victorian society. And this famous painting shows Aurora Lee's dismissal of Romney. So at first, Aurora, you see her diaries by her side, rejected Romney's proposal, but later on she was convinced by him. And Romney, of course, made some changes in his attitude. The Ring in the Book is a long dramatic monologue narrated by monologues narrated by different protagonists or characters or people in the story. It's about an Italian kind of upper class who had killed his wife and her family, and now he is just on a trial on a court, and he is condemned. He just appeals, and again they say that no, he has to be executed. So this is such a story set in Italy. And why Robert and Elizabeth Browning stories are set in Italy? Because there is a romance actually behind this. Elizabeth was sick, and if I'm not mistaken, elder than Roberts, but they met and they fell in love. Elizabeth's father didn't let them to get married. Robert, because he thought that his daughter is sick and nobody can take care of her and her health. Robert told him that I can do something for you, that for your daughter, that you couldn't do. That is, I will just leave my life here in England, and we will move to Italy so that the weather would be better for her health. And this actually softened the heart of Elizabeth's father, and they got married and went to Italy. And that's why they had access to some Italian documents, and they were actually living in Italy. So their stories are set in that country, at least partly. Victorian poetry, we can say in general, if we forget about those long verse narrative poems or verse novels, Victorian poetry is an offspring of Romanticism. But whatever they could do, they couldn't just make it to become a romantic. Romanticism is romanticism. You cannot imitate them. So they say that they at first they try to rewrite romantic poems with a sense of belatedness and distance, but as time passed, the Victorian poets like Tennyson and Browning could find their own voice. So, turning from the mode of his early poetry modeled on Percy Bysshe Shelley, Browning began writing dramatic monologues. Dramatic monologue is a specific contribution of the Victorian poets to poetry, to English poetry. Poems, he said, that are lyric in expression but dramatic in principle. So many utterances of many imaginary persons, not mine. The point about dramatic monologue is that it is not personal. Romantic poetry is based on the personality of the poet, but dramatic monologues are impersonal in the sense that, in the very definition of the term dramatic monologue, we know that the persona, the speaker of the poem, is not in a very clarified way the author. So we cannot make that identification of the persona with the character of the author. And that is absent from these dramatic monologues. Dramatic monologues so generally have some characteristics. First of all, we know that the author and the persona are not the same personages. So we see the distance between the author and the character, the main character. These dramatic monologues are just uttered by that one person. So if they are monologues, why dramatic? Because that person has an addressee. We understand about the presence of that addressee based on the implications in the story. Say, sit, for example, or do you hear, for example? We have such hints in the story so that we know that there is a silent auditor present in there. They are happening at a crucial climactic moment of the story, and so they start from there, and finally they reveal something about the character of that person who's speaking, psychological issues maybe, or psychological features of the character of that person. So the idea of creating a lyric poem in the voice of a speaker, ironically distinct from the poet, is a great achievement of Victorian poetry, perfected in the poetry of both Tennyson and Browning. And about the presence of imagery in Victorian poetry, if you read The Lady of Shalott, for example, or a short poem like Tears, Idle Tears by Tennyson, you see many images. So Victorian poetry is very pictorial, and we can say that the picture, the image, is one character present in the story. So Victorian poetry shares a number of characteristics. So whether written by Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, written by the Rossettis, Gabriel, Dante, and Christina, or written by the Brownings or Tennyson, it tends to be pictorial, using detail to construct visual images that represent the emotion or situation the poem concerns. And also musicality. The sound in Victorian poetry has a distinctive character. So Victorian poetry also uses sound in a distinctive way. The sound of Victorian poetry reflects an attempt to use poetry as a medium, but present almost independent of sense. So uh, somehow the sound becomes more representative than sense. And even sometimes it is said about a poetry written by Alfred Lord Tennyson that the poem is literally meaningless, but it is full of sonority and musicality, and the tone becomes the sign of the feeling. So the feeling, instead of being expressed via words, is expressed through the medium of the music in poetry. the metrics and the rhyme scheme, for example. And one other characteristic of Victorian poetry is representation of mood and character. So the most distinctive achievement is a poetry of mood and character. It best represents, reflects, mirrors the mood of the Victorians. They therefore sat in an easy relationship to the public expectation that poets be sages with something to teach. Unlike the novelists, the poets are not just teaching something. Tennyson, Browning, and Arnold showed varying discomfort with this public role. So they, instead of being the preachers, being the prophets of the society, so again, unlike the romantics, they try to catch, grasp the mood, and just represent it. And if you ask about the Victorian mood, just look at this picture. How this building, which is actually the Royal Academy, is full of paintings, and many of the people who are present there are just present there, but they are not just checking these paintings. And this is the this, let's say, superficial level at which the Victorians lived in their relationship with the arts. And about drama and theater, drama was in a debased position at that time, mostly because of that licensing act, banning many of the plays from appearing on the stage. So, at the time of the Victorians, especially in the mid-Victorian era, it was just like a cinema today. They go to the cinema and they experience an entertainment, but it was not theatrical. It was not deep as a theater. And this was very bad for a nation who had Shakespeare in their heritage. Uh, anyway, the drama of the time is not embittered, improved by the English, but at first, but by some European figures such as Henrik Ibsen, August Strindberg, and Anton Chekhov. Henrik Ibsen is told to be the father of modern theater. He for the first time suggested that the playwrights have to write their plays in the medium of prose, not verse, because verse is the language of the god, while prose is the language of the man. And he wrote problem plays. In problem plays, he tried to address the social issues, the social problems, and tried to just provide solutions for that. George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright, got acquainted with Henrik Ibsen. He tried to translate Henrik Ibsen into English. He was Norwegian. And in his quintessence of Ibsenism, he brought forth a new a theoretical kind of background for 20th century English drama. So it started with Ibsen, and Ibsen was inspiring a figure like George Bernard Shaw. But besides George Bernard Shaw, who was influenced by Ibsen, we have a very original Irish dramatist, Oscar Wilde, who also mocks the hypocrisy in the Victorian, sorry, excuse me, in the Victorian society, especially in plays such as The Importance of Being Earnest. You see the movie rendering of it here. One of them, of course, is very fun and musical if you're interested to watch. And also in plays such as A Woman of No Importance or Lady Windermere's Fan. So in both these playwrights tried to show the problems of the Victorian society, and by addressing them, they put a mirror in front of the Victorians so that they can see the social ills, and they were very proud of the society and the people they were. But they, Wilde and Shaw, both tried to show them something different. They tried to represent the social ills and issues engaged, engaging the people, the real people in Victorian society. So this was my discussion, and I am very happy that you've listened to this point. Thank you very much, and I see you later.